The hospital delivery room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Jessica Winters, 7 months pregnant, wasn't focused on the contractions ripping through her body. No, she was staring at the paper in her trembling hands, the DNA test results that had just shattered everything she thought she knew. "It's not his baby," she whispered to the empty room, her voice cracking like glass. At that exact moment, just outside her door, Jonathan Hale stood in the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. This billionaire hotel mogul, her husband, the father of her unborn child, spoke with the cold precision of a man destroying lives. "Make the transfer, all of it, every account, every investment. She'll never see a dime." He paused, glancing through the small window at his pregnant wife breaking apart on that hospital bed. "And Victoria, have those papers ready. I want her out tonight. My family." What you're about to hear is Jessica's story. A story about what happens when your fairy tale prince becomes your worst nightmare, when the man who promised you forever has been planning your destruction from the very beginning. This isn't just about betrayal, it's about survival. It's about a woman who discovered that everything she believed about her life was a carefully constructed lie. Her marriage, her money, even her pregnancy, all part of a game she never knew she was playing. And here's the thing that's going to keep you glued to this story. Jessica has no idea that the real shock isn't what's in those DNA results, it's what Jonathan is about to do next. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to realize they were planning your downfall, hit that like button, because Jessica's fight is just beginning, and you won't believe how this ends. Now get comfortable and most importantly, smash that subscribe button as fast as you can. Let me take you back to how it all began. 3 years ago, back to when Jessica Winters believed in fairy tales. Jessica was 25 then, working double shifts at Memorial Hospital in downtown Chicago. She'd grown up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, population 40,000, where her biggest worry was whether the diner would run out of pie on Sunday. Now she was drowning in student loan debt, surviving on vending machine coffee, and the dream of someday opening her own children's clinic. She was everything Jonathan Hale wasn't. Where he commanded boardrooms, she comforted sick children. Where he wore $1,000 suits, she wore scrubs, stained with the honest work of saving lives. Where he inherited billions, she earned every dollar through night shifts that left her exhausted, but fulfilled. Jonathan Hale was visiting Memorial that Tuesday for what his PR team called philanthropic visibility. The heir to Hale hospitality empire, hotels in 47 countries worth $2.8 billion, according to Forbes, was there to cut a ribbon and smile for cameras. Harvard-educated, ruthlessly charming and completely accustomed to people falling over themselves to please him. He expected the usual routine, handshakes, photo ops, everyone treating him like royalty. He didn't expect Jessica Winters. The pediatric emergency erupted at 2:47 p.m. 7-year-old Tommy Rodriguez had been rushed in with severe breathing problems. Jessica was running between the ER and the pediatric wing when Jonathan's camera crew decided the hallway made a perfect backdrop for their charity footage. Cables snaked across the floor, bright lights turned the corridor into a movie set, and there was Jessica, trying to rush life-saving medication to a dying child, blocked by a wall of equipment and egos. "Sir, I don't care if you own half of Chicago," Jessica snapped, her Iowa accent sharp with fury. "Move your camera crew now, or I'll have security physically remove every one of you." The hallway went silent. You could hear hearts stopping. Jonathan's publicist looked like she might faint. His lawyer stepped forward to unleash legal threats. But Jonathan, he held up a hand, stopping them all. "Pack it up," he told his team quietly. Now, as the crew scrambled to clear the hallway, Jonathan stayed behind. Something about this fierce, fearless nurse had caught his attention in a way that champagne galas and board meetings never could. He watched Jessica work for the next hour, watched her hold Tommy's mother while doctors fought to save her son, watched her coordinate with respiratory therapists, calm panicked parents, and somehow maintain hope when hope seemed impossible. But Tommy didn't make it. And Jessica held that little boy's hand as he took his last breath. She comforted his parents as they collapsed in grief. She filled out paperwork with steady hands while her heart shattered into pieces. Only when the family had gone, When the room was empty except for machines that no longer beeped, did Jessica finally break down? That's when Jonathan found her, sitting in the supply closet, still in her blood-stained scrubs, crying for a 7-year-old boy she'd known for 3 hours but had loved with everything she had. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes when she saw him. "You must think I'm unprofessional." "I think," Jonathan said softly, "that you're the most professional person I've ever met, and the most human." He sat beside her on those cold tile floors. No cameras, no publicists, no agenda. Just a billionaire and a nurse, sharing grief for a child neither of them could save. "Tell me about him," Jonathan said. So Jessica did. She told him about Tommy's gap-toothed smile, about how he'd asked if the breathing mask made him look like a superhero, about his mother's hands calloused from factory work, trembling as she stroked his hair. That conversation lasted until midnight. They talked about life and death, about purpose and privilege. Jonathan learned that Jessica sent money home to Iowa every month to help her parents keep their farm. Jessica learned that Jonathan's mother had died in a hospital just like this one, alone because he'd been too busy with a merger to visit. They were opposites, in every way that mattered, and maybe that's exactly why it worked. But even then, in those first perfect hours, the warning signs were there. Jessica's best friend Kate saw them immediately. "Billionaires don't date nurses, Jess," Kate warned her the next week when Jonathan had sent flowers to the hospital. "They collect them, like art pieces." Jessica laughed it off then. She was too dizzy with the fairy tale to see the truth Kate was pointing out. The truth in the way Jonathan's phone buzzed constantly with calls he'd never answer in front of her. The evasiveness when she asked about meeting his family. The way he'd changed the subject whenever she mentioned the future. And then there was the moment that should have been a warning, but love has a way of muffling alarm bells. Jessica was dozing on Jonathan's penthouse couch after another exhausting shift when his phone rang. She heard him answer, his voice dropping to that warm tone he used when he thought no one was listening. "Hey there," he said softly. "No, I can't talk long." "Yes, I know it's been too long." Jessica's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Through her sleepy haze, she caught fragments, something about missing someone, a woman's voice faintly calling him darling through the speaker before he moved to the balcony. When he returned 20 minutes later, Jessica pretended to still be asleep. "Business call," she murmured, as he settled beside her. "Board member from the West Coast," Jonathan said smoothly, kissing her forehead. "Time zones. You know how it is." Jessica smiled and curled closer to him. As she thought, female board members existed. And darling was probably just how wealthy people talk to each other. She was probably overthinking it. Small-town girl insecurity creeping in where it didn't belong. After all, this was Jonathan Hale choosing her. Why would she look for problems in paradise? The next 6 months felt like living inside a dream someone else was directing. Jonathan swept Jessica into a world she'd only seen in movies. Private jets to Napa Valley for weekend wine tastings. Michelin-starred dinners where the waiter knew Jonathan's name and his usual table. Shopping trips where he'd buy her an entire wardrobes without blinking at price tags that made Jessica's stomach clench. "You don't need to work so many shifts anymore," he'd say, sliding black American Express cards across marble countertops. "Let me take care of you." Jessica tried to protest, but Jonathan had an answer for everything. Why exhaust herself with double shifts when she could be traveling with him? Why worry about student loans when he could make them disappear with a phone call? Why live in her cramped studio apartment when his penthouse had a view of Lake Michigan? Slowly, without Jessica realizing it was happening, her world got smaller even as it got more luxurious. The first thing to go were the girls' nights with Kate and her nursing school friends. "Business dinner," Jonathan would say apologetically, booking the same restaurants where Jessica's friends couldn't afford appetizers. "I need you there, you're my anchor in all this corporate nonsense." Then came the expensive gifts that felt more like uniforms than presents. Designer dresses in styles Jessica would never choose. Jewelry that looked stunning but felt heavy around her neck. Each gift came with subtle suggestions about when to wear them, who would be there to see them. "You represent me now," Jonathan explained, when Jessica felt uncomfortable in a $3,000 dress at yet another charity gala. "People notice what my girlfriend wears." Jessica met dozens of his business associates, sleek men in identical suits, their wives comparing handbag prices like baseball statistics, but never his family. When Jessica asked about meeting his parents, his sister, anyone from his actual life, Jonathan's answers became vague. My father's traveling, business in Singapore. My sister's dealing with some personal issues, not the best time. Family's complicated when you're in my position. Darling, everyone wants something. The endearment made Jessica's heart flutter, even as questions nagged at the back of her mind. But then Jonathan would kiss her forehead, or surprise her with tickets to Hamilton, or fly her to Paris for a long weekend, and the questions would fade into background noise. 6 months after that first night in the hospital's supply closet, Jonathan proposed. Novi Pier on the 4th of July, fireworks exploding overhead, like the universe celebrating their love. Jessica had mentioned once that she'd always dreamed of getting engaged somewhere with meaning, somewhere that felt like Chicago. Jonathan remembered everything. He dropped to one knee as the fireworks reached their crescendo, pulling out a ring that caught the light like a captured star. The crowd around them erupted in cheers. Phones appeared to capture the magical moment, and Jessica said yes through tears of pure joy. This is it, she thought, watching the ring sparkle on her finger. Cinderella gets her prince. Kate was wrong. He chose me, little old me from Cedar Falls, Iowa. Later she'd realized those random tourists with their phones were Jonathan's PR team, that the proposal had been photographed from 6 different angles, that her fairy tale moment had been a carefully orchestrated media event. But that night, surrounded by cheering strangers in Jonathan's arms, Jessica felt like the luckiest woman alive. The engagement party 2 weeks later filled the ballroom of Chicago's Palmer House Hotel. Jessica floated through the evening in a champagne-colored gown, accepting congratulations from people whose names she'd never remember, feeling like she was starring in someone else's beautiful life. That's when the woman appeared, older, maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. She approached Jessica near the ladies' room, when Jonathan was across the room charming potential investors. Enjoy it while it lasts, honey, the woman said quietly, her voice carrying decades of disappointment. You're not his first charity case. Jessica's champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Excuse me? But before the woman could elaborate, Jonathan materialized beside them like he'd been watching for exactly this moment. Mrs. Chen, he said smoothly, taking Jessica's elbow. I thought we discussed this. You're not welcome at family events anymore. He guided Jessica away as security quietly escorted the woman out. Who was that? Jessica asked, her heart pounding. My uncle's ex-wife, Jonathan explained, his voice heavy with practiced sadness. She's been mentally unstable since the divorce, makes scenes at family gatherings, says terrible things. I should have had security stop her sooner. Jessica wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. 3 days later, while waiting in Jonathan's car as he handled quick business at his office, Jessica's world shifted on its axis. His phone, a second phone she'd never seen before, buzzed from under the passenger seat, where it had apparently fallen. The screen lit up with an incoming call. Victoria, with a love emoji. Jessica stared at that heart emoji, her engagement ring suddenly feeling like a weight around her finger. Before she could decide whether to answer, whether to confront him, whether to run, the phone stopped ringing, but the questions it left behind would haunt her for months to come. 1 year later, Jessica was living in paradise and dying inside. The Hale family mansion in Lake Forest stretched across 12 acres of manicured perfection, 37 rooms, including a library she never used, a gym that reminded her of her abandoned dreams of staying active, and a kitchen so pristine she felt guilty making toast. Lake Michigan sparkled beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but Jessica rarely looked at it anymore. Beauty without purpose becomes just another kind of prison. The transformation had been subtle, like watching your reflection change 1 degree at a time, until you no longer recognized yourself. It started with Jonathan's gentle suggestions after their honeymoon in Tuscany. Why rush back to the hospital when they were still adjusting to married life? Why not take a few weeks to settle into the house, to plan their future together? You don't need to work anymore, darling, he'd said, his hands warm on her shoulders, as they stood in the master bedroom that was larger than her entire childhood home. You've worked so hard for so long, Let me take care of everything now, Jessica had protested weakly. Nursing wasn't just her job, it was who she was. But Jonathan had answers for every concern. Her student loans, paid in full, her need to help people. She could volunteer for his charities, make a real difference with real resources. Her independence. We're partners now, sweetheart. What's mine is yours. The isolation crept in like fog rolling off the lake. When Kate called, asking about girls' night, Jessica found herself making excuses. Jonathan has this business dinner I need to attend. When her nursing school friends invited her to their monthly reunion, she hesitated. I should check Jonathan's schedule first. And somehow Jonathan's schedule always conflicted. My friends wouldn't understand your background, darling, he'd explain when Jessica suggested bringing Kate to their country club gatherings. It's not personal, it's just different worlds. You know how awkward that can be. Jessica did know. She'd felt that awkwardness at every charity gala, every business dinner, every carefully curated social event where she smiled and nodded, while conversations swirled around mergers and acquisitions and trust funds she couldn't comprehend. When her parents called from Iowa, wanting to visit their new son-in-law, Jonathan was always traveling. Family dinners are usually just business anyway, he'd say. You'd be bored out of your mind, and frankly they might not understand the complexities of what I do. Gradually Jessica's world shrank to the size of those 37 rooms, and the man who controlled them all. The emotional manipulation was an art form, so subtle she didn't recognize it until she was drowning in it. When Jessica mentioned missing her old life, Jonathan's face would crumple with hurt. With hurt. If, after everything I've given you, you still need those people, am I not enough? When she tried to call Kate more often, Jonathan would get quiet, distant. I understand you need your friends, he'd say sadly. I just thought we were building something special together, but if you prefer your old life. When Jessica wanted to visit Iowa for her mother's birthday, Jonathan's voice carried the weight of deep disappointment. Of course you should go if it's important to you. I'll just cancel the anniversary trip to Santorini I'd planned as a surprise. Family first, right? Each conversation left Jessica feeling selfish, ungrateful, confused about her own needs and desires. She found herself apologizing for wanting things she'd never questioned before: friendships, family time, purpose beyond being beautiful on someone's arm. Then came the pregnancy. Jessica discovered it on a Tuesday morning in March, staring at two pink lines in the mansion's marble bathroom. Her first emotion was pure joy. She and Jonathan had talked about children, about the family they'd build together. This was the next chapter in their fairy tale. She found Jonathan in his study, surrounded by contracts and corporate documents. When she showed him the test, his reaction stopped her heart. The pause lasted too long. His face went blank, calculating, like he was solving a complex equation instead of celebrating new life. Are you sure it's, he started, then caught himself. I mean, when exactly did this happen? Jessica felt something cold settle in her chest. What kind of question is that? Jonathan's mask slipped back into place, so quickly she might have imagined the moment of coldness. Just calculating due dates for business planning, sweetheart. I want to make sure I'm here for everything important. But Jessica had seen that look, the same expression he wore during hostile takeovers and difficult negotiations. As if her pregnancy was a problem to be managed rather than a miracle to be celebrated. The signs she'd been ignoring became impossible to dismiss. Late-night phone calls behind locked doors, Jonathan's voice dropping to intimate whispers she never heard when he spoke to her anymore. Hotel receipts tucked into suit pockets. The Drake, the Peninsula, luxury hotels in downtown Chicago when he claimed to be working late at the office in the suburbs. And then there was the earring. Pearl drop. Expensive but not flashy. Nothing like the dramatic diamonds Jonathan bought for Jessica. She found it wedged between the passenger seat cushions of his Tesla, right where a woman might lean over to kiss him goodbye. Must have fallen out of your purse, Jonathan said when she showed it to him, barely glancing up from his laptop. I don't own pearl earrings, Jessica replied quietly. Probably one of the charity board members. You know how they're always getting in and out of the car for events. But Jessica knew he drove himself to business meetings. She knew because she'd asked to come along so many times, only to be told they'd be bored. 6 months pregnant now, Jessica found herself eating dinner alone more nights than not. The dining room table that seated 20 felt cavernous when it was just her, and the echo of her own thoughts. Jonathan was always working late, always traveling, always somewhere that didn't include his pregnant wife. That's when she called Kate, her voice breaking with the weight of isolation and confusion. "I have everything I ever dreamed of," Jessica whispered into the phone, one hand resting on her growing belly. "The house, the money, the security. I should be grateful, I should be happy." But Kate prompted gently. "But I feel like I'm disappearing," Jessica admitted. "Like I'm becoming smaller every day, and I don't know how to stop it." Kate was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful but firm. "Jess, honey, when was the last time you made a decision without asking Jonathan first?" Jessica opened her mouth to answer, and realized she couldn't remember. That silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with all the truth Jessica wasn't ready to face. Not yet, but the foundation was cracking, and even fairy tales built on lies can't stand forever. The discovery came on a Thursday morning, while Jessica was doing laundry, the one domestic task she'd insisted on keeping, needing some small way to feel useful in her own home. Jonathan's suits from his business trip to Milwaukee were hanging in the dry cleaning bags, but his pants pockets still held the debris of deception. Credit card receipts, business cards, the usual corporate detritus. Jessica had stopped checking months ago, tired of finding evidence of a life she wasn't part of. But that morning, 7 months pregnant and unable to bend comfortably, she almost missed the receipt that would change everything. The Blackstone Hotel, Chicago's most exclusive address, where rooms started at $800 a night. The date made Jessica's blood freeze. Last Tuesday, the same Tuesday, Jonathan had supposedly been in Milwaukee closing a deal with hotel investors. Jessica sank onto their king-sized bed, staring at the elegant letterhead. The Blackstone was 15 minutes from their house. 15 minutes from where she'd eaten dinner alone, believing her husband was 3 hours away building their future. Her hands shook as she checked the dates against her calendar. Every business trip to Milwaukee corresponded to a night at the Blackstone. Every late meeting, every weekend conference, every excuse that had left her isolated in their beautiful prison. For the first time in months, Jessica made a decision without consulting Jonathan first. Kate's brother, Luis, was a criminal defense attorney who'd seen enough cheating spouses to recommend discretion over confrontation. "You need facts before accusations," he'd told Jessica during their hushed phone conversation. "Emotional confrontations just give them time to cover tracks." That's how Jessica met David Torres on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in a coffee shop near Millennium Park. Mid-40s, steady eyes, the kind of man who'd seen every human betrayal and somehow maintained faith in justice. "I need to know what my husband is doing when he's not with me," Jessica said, her wedding ring feeling foreign on her finger. David's investigation lasted 3 weeks, where Jessica continued playing the perfect wife, while evidence of her husband's double life accumulated like poison in her bloodstream. The first revelation came via encrypted email photographs of Jonathan entering a luxury penthouse building in River North. Not just visiting, entering with the confidence of ownership, using a keycard Jessica had never seen. Property records show the lease is under a shell company. David's accompanying report read, but the payments trace back to accounts linked to Hale Hospitality. The second revelation arrived with video footage. A woman Jessica didn't recognize letting herself into that same penthouse. Tall, elegant, red hair catching Chicago's sunlight as she laughed at something on her phone. The timestamp showed 2:00 the same Tuesday Jonathan had texted Jessica about working late. David's research identified her within hours. Victoria Lancaster, owner of Lancaster Gallery in the Gold Coast, divorced, no children, member of Chicago's cultural elite. Her Instagram showed a life of gallery openings, charity auctions, and intimate dinners at restaurants Jessica recognized from Jonathan's credit card bills. The third revelation made Jessica vomit. Financial records showing jewelry purchases from Tiffany, Cartier, Harry Winston, expensive pieces bought on dates that meant something, anniversaries Jessica didn't share, birthdays she didn't celebrate, jewelry that had never touched her skin. Jessica was studying the receipts when David called, his voice urgent in a way that made her stomach clench. "Jessica, you need to see this immediately. Can you meet me now?" "What is it?" "It's bigger than an affair." They met at the same coffee shop, but this time David spread photographs across their corner table like he was laying out evidence for a jury. Jessica's world tilted on its axis. The photos showed Jonathan and Victoria at Chicago City Hall, not just visiting, standing before a clerk, holding documents, exchanging rings Jessica had never seen. The date stamp made Jessica's vision blur. 2 years and 3 months ago, 6 months before Jonathan had proposed to her at Navy Pier. "They're married," David said quietly. "Legally married, have been for over 2 years." Jessica couldn't breathe. The coffee shop sounds faded to white noise as the implications crashed over her like Lake Michigan waves. Her marriage, their marriage, was a lie, a performance, a fraud. "That means she whispered, "not his wife," David finished gently. "You're his mistress, and he's committed bigamy." Jessica collapsed forward, her pregnant belly pressing against the table edge as sobs racked her body. Every anniversary dinner, every "I love you," every promise about their future together, all of it built on a foundation of calculated deception. But David wasn't finished. The next folder contained bank records that made Jessica's betrayal complete. "Your grandmother's inheritance," David explained as Jessica stared at transaction records through tear-blurred vision. "The trust fund she left you for starting that children's clinic. He's been systematically transferring it to offshore accounts. $230,000. Jessica's entire inheritance, left by a grandmother who'd worked 3 jobs to help pay for Jessica's nursing school. Money meant to honor a woman's dream of helping children, siphoned away by the man Jessica trusted with her life. The transfers started the week after your wedding," David continued. "Small amounts at first, nothing you'd notice, but it's been going on for months. There's less than 15,000 left." Jessica felt something die inside her chest. Not just love, hope itself was suffocating under the weight of Jonathan's betrayal. He hadn't just stolen her money, he'd stolen her future, her purpose, her grandmother's legacy. "How long have you known?" she asked David, her voice barely audible. "I suspected the marriage fraud when I saw the property records, but the financial theft, that's recent, probably accelerating because..." David hesitated. "Because what?" "Because of the baby. Men like Jonathan don't leave loose ends. He's planning something." As if summoned by David's warning, Jessica's phone buzzed. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen, along with a message that made her blood turn to ice water. "Darling, I'm coming home early tonight. We need to talk about the baby." Jessica stared at the text, her mind racing. Jonathan never came home early, never discussed the baby beyond practical necessities, never initiated conversations about their future. "David," she whispered, showing him the message. "What if he knows I know?" David's expression grew grim. "Then you're in more danger than we thought." Jessica's phone buzzed again. Another text from Jonathan. "Pack a bag, sweetheart. I've planned a romantic getaway for us. Just the 2 of us. Before the baby comes, we leave tonight." In that moment, Jessica realized the truth that would save her life. Fairy tales don't have happy endings when the prince is the monster, and Jonathan Hale wasn't planning a romantic getaway, he was planning her disappearance. Jessica sat in her car outside the coffee shop, David's evidence folder clutched against her chest, like armor. Her phone kept buzzing with texts from Jonathan, each message more insistent than the last. "Where are you, darling? I'm home early. The car isn't in the garage. Everything okay? Jessica, I'm starting to worry. Call me." David knocked on her passenger window, his face grim. "We need to talk about your next move, and we need to talk fast." Jessica rolled down the window, her voice hollow. "He knows, doesn't he, that I found out?" Men like Jonathan are always watching, always calculating. The timing of his texts isn't coincidence. David leaned closer, his voice urgent. "Jessica, you cannot go home alone. You cannot confront him privately. Cornered predators are the most dangerous." The reality hit Jessica, like physical pain. She was carrying Jonathan's child, had been living in his house, had given him control over every aspect of her life, and now he was planning to eliminate the evidence of his crimes, starting with her. "What do I do?" she whispered. I have nowhere to go, no money that isn't his, no life that isn't connected to him. David was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. When is the Hull charity gala? Tomorrow night. Why? 400 guests, media coverage, live streaming for donors who can't attend. David's eyes lit up with possibility. Jonathan thinks he controls the narrative, because he controls you privately, but he can't control you in front of 400 witnesses. The plan formed like a lifeline in Jessica's drowning world. Jonathan's annual moment of triumph, the charity gala, where he played the benevolent billionaire, would become his public reckoning. You expose him where he feels safest, David explained, where he thinks he has all the power, where his entire reputation is on display. Jessica spent that night in a hotel room David paid for, practicing words that felt like pulling glass from her throat. 7 months pregnant, standing before a bathroom mirror, she rehearsed the speech that would save her life. You stole my money, she said to her reflection, one hand resting on her belly. You stole my freedom, my identity, my future. Her voice grew stronger. But you won't steal my voice. The next evening, Jessica arrived at the Palmer House ballroom separately from Jonathan, wearing the diamond necklace he'd given her on their fake wedding night. If she was going to war, she'd wear his weapons as armor. The ballroom glittered with Chicago's elite, politicians, investors, socialites who measured worth in zeros after decimal points. Jessica had attended dozens of these events as Jonathan's beautiful accessory. Tonight she was here as his destroyer. Jonathan commanded the stage like he was born for it, his tuxedo perfect, his smile radiating the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. Thank you all for joining us tonight. His voice carried across the ballroom, warm and practiced. The Hale Foundation's work with underprivileged children wouldn't be possible without your generosity. Polite applause, camera flashes. Jessica watched from her table near the back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Family has always been at the center of everything I do, Jonathan continued, his eyes finding Jessica in the crowd, building a legacy worth passing on to the next generation. More applause. Jessica thought of her grandmother's stolen inheritance, money meant to help children that Jonathan had funneled into offshore accounts. None of this would be possible without the love and support of my beautiful wife, Jessica. The spotlight found her. 400 faces turned in her direction. Cameras swung toward her table as applause filled the ballroom. This was her moment. Jessica stood slowly, her pregnant silhouette unmistakable in the spotlight. The applause continued as she made her way toward the stage, guests assuming she was coming to offer gracious remarks about their charitable work. Jonathan's smile remained perfect, but Jessica saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertain. For the first time in their relationship, he didn't know what she was going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, Jessica said, as she approached the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Thank you for welcoming me tonight. That's when she saw David Torres enter through the ballroom's back doors, carrying a manila envelope thick with evidence. Security tried to stop him, but he held up his investigator's license and moved purposefully toward the front of the room. And just then, Jonathan's smile finally faltered. My family, I need you to stay with Jessica right now. What she's about to do takes more courage than most of us will ever need. Drop a heart in the comments if you're rooting for her strength. And if this story has you holding your breath, hit that subscribe button because the confrontation you're about to witness will leave you absolutely speechless. Jessica's hands gripped the microphone stand as 400 of Chicago's most powerful people waited for her words. Behind her she could hear Jonathan's sharp intake of breath as David reached the front row. This was it, the moment when the mouse revealed herself to be a lioness. And Jonathan Hale was about to learn what happened when you cornered the wrong woman. Jessica's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk. Thank you all for coming tonight. You're here to celebrate the Hale family's generosity. She paused, one hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, the other gripping the microphone with white knuckles. But I'm here to tell you about their theft. The ballroom erupted in gasps. Champagne glasses clinked as they were set down too quickly. The gentle murmur of Chicago's elite turned into shocked whispers that rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Jonathan stepped forward, his perfect smile cracking at the edges. Jessica, darling, you're not feeling well. The pregnancy has been difficult, But David Torres was already moving, stepping between Jonathan and the podium like a human shield. "Let her speak," he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Jessica's voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of months of silence finally broken. "For 2 years, I believed I was Mrs. Jonathan Hale. I planned our future together, carried his child, trusted him with my life." The cameras that had been focusing on Jonathan's charitable remarks now captured every word of Jessica's revelation. The live stream comments exploded with confusion and disbelief. "But his real wife is Victoria Lancaster," Jessica continued, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "They were married in a private ceremony while he was courting me, while he was promising me forever." A woman at the front table actually dropped her phone. The sound of shattering glass punctuated Jessica's words like an exclamation point. Jonathan tried again to approach the podium. "This is preposterous. She's having some kind of breakdown." "Stay back," David warned, and something in his tone made Jonathan freeze. Jessica pulled David's evidence from the envelope he'd handed her, holding up the marriage certificate for the cameras to see. The marriage took place at Chicago City Hall. The witnesses were Victoria's gallery employees. The date was 6 months before Jonathan proposed to me at Navy Pier. The ballroom had gone dead silent except for the clicking of camera phones, capturing every moment. "He's also stolen $230,000 from my family inheritance." Jessica's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. "Money? My grandmother left to help me open a children's clinic. Money meant to honor her memory and help the children. Your donations claim to support." She held up bank records, transaction histories, offshore account statements. David had prepared everything for this moment. "The transfers started the week after our fake wedding ceremony. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as he grew confident I'd never discover the truth." Board members at the front tables were already reaching for their phones. Jessica could see the panic in their eyes. Stock prices, investor confidence, corporate liability, all crashing in real time. But Jessica wasn't finished. The hardest revelation was still coming. "And the DNA test I received today," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "proves that this baby, our baby, he's been questioning its paternity while planning to abandon us both." The crowd's shock turned to outrage. Even in Chicago's elite circles, some betrayals crossed every line of acceptable behavior. Jonathan's composure finally shattered completely. "She's mentally unstable. Pregnancy hormones. This is all fabricated lies from a woman having a psychological breakdown." His voice carried the desperate edge of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. But David was ready. He stepped forward, with a briefcase full of evidence, speaking directly to the cameras. Bank records from 3 different institutions, marriage certificate with official state seals, DNA laboratory reports with chain of custody documentation, private investigator photos with timestamps and GPS locations. David's voice was calm, professional, devastating. "Everything Mrs. Winters has said can be independently verified." That's when the ballroom doors burst open. Victoria Lancaster strode in like an avenging angel, her red hair catching the chandelier's light, her face twisted with fury. She'd been watching the live stream from her gallery, and Jessica's revelations had destroyed her carefully maintained secret life. "Jonathan, you promised me you'd handle this." Victoria's voice carried across the silent ballroom, reaching every microphone, every camera, every witness. The crowd turned toward her like spectators at a tennis match, heads swiveling between Jessica at the podium and Victoria in the doorway. "You said she'd never find out about us. You said the money transfers were untraceable." Victoria's rage made her careless with her words, confirming every accusation Jessica had made. Jonathan looked like a man trapped between 2 firing squads. His face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the ballroom's perfect air conditioning. "Victoria, stop talking," he hissed, but it was too late. "Stop talking." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You've ruined everything. The gallery, our marriage, our future. All because you couldn't resist playing house with your little nurse." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Victoria had just confirmed their marriage, the financial theft, and the calculated deception of Jessica's entire relationship. Jonathan's world collapsed in real time. Board members were already standing, distancing themselves from the carnage. Phones buzzed constantly as investors received alerts about Hale Hospitality's stock price plummeting. The charity donors who'd come to celebrate Jonathan's philanthropy were witnessing the public destruction of everything they'd believed about him. "Ladies and gentlemen," one board member announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "the Hale Foundation's board of directors will be conducting an immediate investigation into these allegations." But the corporate damage control came too late. Social media had already picked up the live stream. Hale's scandal was trending on Twitter. News outlets were scrambling to cover the story of Chicago's most eligible bachelor, exposed as a bigamist and thief. The stress of the confrontation, the adrenaline of finally speaking her truth, the weight of carrying a child while exposing its father's crimes, it all crashed over Jessica at once. Pain shot through her abdomen like lightning. She gasped, doubling over at the podium, her hand pressing against her belly as contractions began. "The baby," she whispered, then louder, "Something's wrong with the baby." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Someone screamed for a doctor. Security guards rushed toward the podium. David caught Jessica as she collapsed, her water breaking right there on the stage where Jonathan had planned to celebrate his false philanthropic image. "Call an ambulance," David shouted, cradling Jessica as she gripped his arm with desperate strength. Through the pain, through the chaos, Jessica found David's eyes and held them with fierce intensity. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "If something happens to me during delivery, don't let him get my baby. Promise me." David's voice was steady, certain, protective. "I promise, Jessica, he'll never touch that child." As paramedics rushed Jessica toward the ambulance, the ballroom behind them remained in chaos. Jonathan stood abandoned at the center of his destroyed empire, surrounded by evidence of his crimes, his lies exposed to 400 witnesses and thousands of live-stream viewers. Victoria had disappeared as quickly as she'd arrived, probably already calling her lawyers. The board members were huddled in emergency session, trying to salvage what remained of Hale Hospitality. And Jessica Winters, 7 months pregnant, fighting for her life and her child's future, was finally free from the fairy tale that had nearly destroyed them both. But the real battle was just beginning. Because men like Jonathan Hale don't surrender their assets easily, and a newborn baby was about to become the most valuable asset of all. Lily Rose Winters entered the world at 3:47 a.m., screaming with the fierce indignation of someone who'd had enough drama for one lifetime. Jessica held her daughter for the first time in the quiet of Northwestern Memorial's maternity ward, the same hospital where she'd once worked double shifts and dreamed of a different future. The baby was perfect, tiny fists, dark hair, Jonathan's stubborn chin, but Jessica's determined eyes. "Hello, little warrior," Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We made it." The peace lasted exactly 4 hours. Jonathan arrived at the hospital with an army of lawyers, his expensive suits replaced by the uniform of desperate men everywhere, rumpled clothes, unshaven face, eyes that had seen their empire crumble overnight. But his entitlement remained intact. "I want to see my daughter," he demanded at the nurse's station, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. The nurse on duty, someone Jessica had worked with years ago, looked at him with the kind of cold professionalism reserved for men who threatened new mothers. "Visiting hours start at 10 a.m., and you'll need to be on the approved visitor list. I'm her father." "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. This is a maternity ward." That's when David Torres appeared in the hallway like Jessica's guardian angel, flanked by his own legal team. He'd spent the night preparing for this exact moment. "Miss Hale." David's voice was calm, professional, devastating. "Your client has no legal standing to demand anything regarding this child." Jonathan's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman whose hourly rate could finance a small hospital wing, stepped forward. "My client is the biological father. He has constitutional rights. Your client signed away all parental rights when he committed bigamy and fraud." David interrupted smoothly. "Illinois family law is very clear. Men who deceive women into false marriages forfeit legal parental claims." The DNA test results, expedited through David's connections, had arrived that morning. Jonathan was indeed Lily's biological father, but biology meant nothing in the face of criminal fraud. Furthermore, David continued pulling documents from his briefcase like weapons from an arsenal. Miss Hale is facing federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and bigamy. The court has already issued a restraining order preventing him from contact with Miss Winters or her daughter. Jessica watched from her hospital room doorway, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. She wasn't the naive nurse who'd fallen for a fairy tale anymore. She was a mother, and mothers were the fiercest creatures on earth. When Jonathan saw her, his face crumpled with what might have been genuine emotion, or just the realization that his last asset was slipping away. "Jessica, please, she's my daughter too." Jessica's voice was steady, final, devastating. "You wanted to know if she was yours. She is, but you'll never be her father." The distinction hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Fathers loved, protected, sacrificed. He'd done none of those things. He'd been a sperm donor with a trust fund, and a talent for manipulation. Within hours, the story exploded across social media like digital wildfire. Billionaire's bigamy exposed by pregnant wife at charity gala. The headlines wrote themselves. Jessica Winters trended nationally alongside charity scandal and billionaire fraud. The video of Jessica's public confrontation had been viewed over 2 million times, shared by celebrities, commented on by politicians, dissected by legal experts on every major news network. But the most powerful response came from women. Jessica's hospital room filled with flowers from strangers, nurses in Seattle, teachers in Atlanta, single mothers in Detroit, who saw their own struggles reflected in her story. The hashtag #GANZEES, I stand with Jessica, became a rallying cry for women who'd survived financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic isolation. Then came the calls David had been hoping for. "You need to hear this," he told Jessica, holding up his phone. "3 other women have come forward. Jonathan's done this before." The pattern emerged like a blueprint for predation. Wealthy, powerful men didn't develop their manipulation skills overnight. They practiced on vulnerable women, refining their techniques, leaving a trail of destroyed lives behind them. Rebecca, a social worker from Boston, targeted during her divorce, isolated from her support system, financially ruined when Jonathan disappeared with her settlement money. Carmen, a teacher from Phoenix, swept into a fake engagement, convinced to quit her job, and move to Chicago, abandoned when she started asking too many questions about his mysterious business trips. Lisa, a young architect from Portland. The pattern was always the same. Identify vulnerable women, love bomb them into submission, isolate them systematically, steal their resources, discard them when they became inconvenient. Jessica hadn't been Jonathan's victim. She'd been his latest victim. "The FBI wants to talk to you," David said quietly. "This isn't just fraud anymore. This is a pattern of racketeering. They're building a case that could put him away for 20 years. The legal victories came swiftly after that. Federal courts froze Jonathan's assets, pending investigation. Jessica's inheritance was recovered in full, plus damages for emotional distress and punitive compensation. The children's clinic her grandmother had dreamed of was no longer a fantasy. It was a funded reality. Victoria Lancaster, facing her own fraud charges as an accomplice, had fled to Europe. Her art gallery was shuttered, her assets seized. Her marriage to Jonathan dissolved faster than it had been consummated. 3 days after Lily's birth, Jessica's parents arrived from Iowa. Her father, weathered hands gentle as he held his first grandchild, spoke the words Jessica had needed to hear all her life. "You did good, sweetheart, real good." Her mother, tears streaming down her face, said what Jessica needed to hear most. "We're proud of you, honey. It takes real courage to fight a man with that much power. But you didn't just fight him, you stopped him." Kate arrived with a care package and the kind of fierce loyalty that had sustained their friendship through everything. "Remember when I said billionaires don't date nurses, they collect them?" Kate said, watching Jessica nurse Lily with practiced competence. "I was wrong. This one tried to collect you, but he ended up with a wildfire instead." Jessica laughed, her first real laugh in months, as Lily's tiny fist wrapped around her finger with surprising strength. "She's going to be trouble," Jessica said, looking at her daughter with fierce pride. "Good," Kate replied. "The world needs more trouble like this." Outside Jessica's hospital window, Chicago stretched toward Lake Michigan, the city where she'd been destroyed and reborn. She'd entered this hospital as Jonathan Hale's victim. She was leaving as Lily Winters' mother, And that made all the difference in the world. The fairy tale was over, real life was just beginning. Finally the gavel fell on a Tuesday morning, 1 year later in federal court, and with it Jonathan Hale's empire finished crumbling into dust. The defendant will serve 5 years in federal prison for charges of bigamy, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Judge Patricia Coleman announced, her voice carrying the weight of justice too long delayed. Additionally, the court orders full restitution to all victims and forfeiture of assets obtained through criminal enterprise. Jessica sat in the gallery, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching the man who'd nearly destroyed them both led away in handcuffs. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the quiet peace that comes when monsters can't hurt you anymore. Victoria Lancaster, seated at the defendant's table beside her own attorney, received 2 years plus massive civil penalties. Her art gallery empire, built on stolen money and criminal conspiracies, had collapsed as spectacularly as her secret marriage. Justice served, David whispered to Jessica as they watched the bailiffs escort both defendants from the courtroom. How does it feel? Jessica looked down at Lily, now 13 months old, whose biggest concerns were mastering walking and declaring everything either mama or no, depending on her mood. It feels like we can finally move forward, Jessica said quietly, and they had moved forward, spectacularly. Lily's children's clinic opened its doors, 6 months after the trial, in a renovated building on Chicago's South Side, where healthcare had been a luxury many families couldn't afford. Funded by Jessica's recovered inheritance, the settlement money, and donations from women who'd been inspired by her story, the clinic provided pediatric care regardless of families' ability to pay. Jessica walked through the bright, cheerful waiting room every morning, seeing her grandmother's dream made real in children's laughter and parents' grateful tears. The walls were painted with murals of strong, adventurous princesses, not waiting to be rescued, but rescuing themselves and others. Dr. Rivera is ready for you in room 3, Jessica told Mrs. Chen, whose 5-year-old daughter had been coming to the clinic for asthma treatment. The same Miss Chen who'd tried to warn Jessica at that engagement party, who turned out to be not Jonathan's unstable ex-relative, but a former victim who'd recognized the pattern and tried to save her. Carlos Rivera had joined the clinic as head of pediatric surgery after meeting Jessica at a medical conference, where she'd spoken about healthcare access for vulnerable families. He was everything Jonathan hadn't been: kind without calculation, generous without expectation, strong enough to love a woman who'd learned to save herself. You don't need rescuing, Jessica, he'd told her early in their relationship, watching her comfort a frightened child before surgery. You're the one doing the rescuing now. Their relationship grew slowly, carefully, built on respect and equality, rather than fairy tales and false promises. Carlos understood that Jessica's strength came from surviving betrayal, not from never being hurt. Ma'am, Lily called from her playpen in Jessica's office, holding up a stuffed elephant triumphantly. Very good, baby girl, Jessica said, scooping up her daughter for a quick cuddle before her next appointment. The ripple effects of Jessica's story had spread far beyond their personal healing. Illinois had passed the Jessica Winters Act, strengthening penalties for marriage fraud and financial abuse. Other states were following suit. Jessica had testified before Congress about protecting women from financial predators, her voice steady and clear as she spoke for victims who couldn't speak for themselves. Predators rely on isolation and shame, she'd told the congressional committee. When we share our stories, when we refuse to hide, we break the cycle that allows them to find new victims. The congressional testimony had been broadcast live, watched by millions of women who saw their own struggles reflected in Jessica's journey from victim to advocate. Every Tuesday evening, Jessica volunteered at Memorial Hospital, mentoring young nurses just starting their careers. It was there she met Ana Rodriguez, a 23-year-old pediatric nurse whose story sounded disturbingly familiar. He says he wants to take care of me, Ana explained during their coffee break, talking about her wealthy boyfriend who'd been gradually isolating her from friends and family. But sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. Jessica's heart clenched with recognition. Trust your instincts, Ana. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But he's been so generous. The gifts, the trips, the promises about our future. The best predators always are generous at first, Jessica said gently. They invest in you like you're a stock they're planning to sell. The question is, does he celebrate your indebted, or does he try to control it? Anna was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I think I know the answer. You have my number, Jessica said, squeezing the young woman's hand. And you have your voice. Don't let anyone steal either one. That night, Jessica tucked Lily into her crib in their cozy apartment. Not a mansion, but a home filled with love and laughter and the kind of peace that money can't buy. Once upon a time, Jessica read from Lily's favorite bedtime story. There was a brave princess who discovered that the most powerful magic of all was believing in herself. Lily's eyes drooped as Jessica's voice grew softer, but she managed one more. Mama before sleep claimed her. Jessica sat in the quiet nursery watching her daughter sleep, thinking about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. The naive girl from Iowa who'd believed in fairy tales was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, more genuinely happy than she'd ever imagined possible. Outside their window, Chicago sparkled with possibilities. Not fairy tale castles, but real dreams built on solid foundations. And for the first time in years, Jessica's dreams were entirely her own. 2 years later, Jessica stood in a federal courthouse once again, but this time as a voice of strength rather than a victim of circumstance. Jonathan sat in orange prison garb at the defendant's table, seeking early release after serving only 2 of his 5-year sentence. His lawyers spoke of rehabilitation, of lessons learned, of a man changed by incarceration. When Jessica stepped to the podium to deliver her victim impact statement, her voice was steady, clear, unshakable. You didn't just steal my money or betray my trust, she said, looking directly at the man who'd once controlled every aspect of her life. You tried to steal my identity, my voice, my future. You tried to make me disappear while you built your empire on stolen dreams. Jonathan stared at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. But here's what you didn't count on, Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger. You made me discover exactly who I was underneath all your lies. You made me find my voice. You made me stronger than I ever knew I could be. The parole board deliberated for less than 20 minutes. Parole denied. Later that afternoon, Jessica picked up 2-year-old Lily from daycare, her daughter's chubby arms wrapping around her neck in a hug that made everything worthwhile. As they walked home hand in hand, they passed a newspaper stand with a headline that caught Jessica's eye. Hale Hotels files for bankruptcy. Mama, happy? Lily asked, her vocabulary expanding daily but her intuition about her mother's emotions already remarkably sharp. Jessica looked down at her daughter, walking confidently now, chattering constantly, fearless in the way only children who've always known they were loved could be. Yes, baby girl. Mama's very happy. As they continued toward their cozy apartment, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd once believed she needed a prince to save her from an ordinary life. It turned out she just needed to save herself. Beautiful souls, Jessica's transformation from victim to survivor to warrior shows us that our greatest betrayals can become our greatest strength. If her story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of speaking truth to power. Subscribe for more stories where courage conquers cruelty. What would you have done in Jessica's position? Your voice matters. Tell us in the comments. Remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more loved than you realize.